4 years, 11 applications, 1 point, and a man who stood at the board and smiled, and that smile broke Steve Harvey completely open. Earl Buford submitted his first application to Family Feud on March 12, 2018. He filled it out at his kitchen table in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, on a Sunday afternoon, the television on low in the background, a cup of sweet tea going warm beside the notepad where he had written down the 5 names he was proposing: himself, his wife June, their son Terrell, their daughter-in-law Keisha, and his sister Francine. He read it over 3 times, the way he read everything 3 times. He was a retired postal worker, 31 years, and he had learned early that the difference between a package arriving and a package lost was usually one unread line. He submitted it online with Terrell's help. Terrell had set up the email account for him 2 years prior and maintained a running suspicion that his father treated the internet with the same caution one extended to a new dog. Potentially fine, probably fine, but worth watching. Earl did not hear back. He submitted again in September 2018 with a cover letter this time. Handwritten, 1 page, explaining who the family was and why they should be chosen. He described June, 61 years old, the fastest thinker in any room, the woman who had been completing his sentences for 37 years and who was correct approximately 90% of the time, a figure he considered conservative. He described Terrell, who worked in IT and had the methodical speed of someone who had spent 20 years solving problems before anyone else noticed they existed. He described Keisha, who was 36 and a high school principal, and who had, Earl wrote, the ability to know what a group of people is thinking before they know it themselves, which is probably why she runs a school. He described Francine, who was 63 and had worked in a grocery store for 26 years, and who knew, from decades of watching what people put in their carts and what they said to each other in the checkout line, an enormous amount about what ordinary people wanted and how they thought. He did not hear back from the second application either. He submitted a 3rd time in February 2019, a 4th in August 2019, a 5th with a photograph of the family at Terrell and Keisha's wedding anniversary dinner, everyone in blue, June in a hat that Earl had told her was too much, and that had been demonstrably not too much, in January 2020. The pandemic arrived in March 2020, and production paused. Earl did not submit during the pause because it seemed, as he told June, like bad manners. He waited. He submitted again in October 2020 when tapings resumed, and again in March 2021, and again in August 2021. That was 8 applications across 3.5 years. He kept a folder, physical, manila, labeled Family Feud, in his postal worker's precise handwriting, with a copy of every submission, every confirmation email Terrell had printed for him, every note he had made about what to improve next time. He showed the folder to no one except June. June had known about every application from the first one, because Earl did not keep things from June, had not in 37 years, and was not going to start now. But he had not shown the folder to Terrell or Keisha or Francine, because the folder represented a specific kind of hoping that he had decided was his to carry. Not because he was ashamed of it, because hope, in Earl Buford's understanding, was a private thing until it became a shared thing. And it became a shared thing only when it was ready, when it had enough weight behind it to survive being said out loud. What Earl had never told anyone, not June, not Terrell, not Francine, not his pastor Reverend Coleman, who had known him for 22 years, was what the show meant to him in the specific and personal way that things mean something when they are tied to a person who is gone. His mother, Edna Buford, had watched Family Feud every weekday evening from 1977 until she died in 2016. She had watched it with the focused attention of a woman who took it seriously, calling out answers, arguing with the board, maintaining strong opinions about which host era was superior. She and Earl had watched it together every time he visited, which was every other Sunday for the 16 years he lived in Pine Bluff, and she lived in the same house in Fordyce, 40 minutes away, where he had grown up. They had a system. She answered the survey questions, he argued with her answers. They kept a running tally of who was more often right. The tally, which they both maintained on the same pad of paper that lived by her telephone, showed that she was ahead by a margin she considered definitive, and he considered to be in the margin of error. She died in April 2016 of congestive heart failure, quickly and without much warning, the way some people go when their bodies have simply finished. Earl had been with her. He had been holding her hand, which he considered the most important thing he had ever done, and also the thing that had cost him the most, in the quiet way that the most important things cost you. He had kept the tally pad. It was in the manila folder, behind all the applications. He had not told anyone it was in there. 2 years after Edna died, on a Sunday afternoon in March 2018, Earl had sat at his kitchen table and thought about his mother calling out answers from her chair. And he had thought about the tally, and he had thought about what it would have meant to her to see her family on that stage. And he had opened the laptop and started filling out the application. Not for prize money, or not only for that, for the particular continuity of a thing his mother had loved, carried forward by people she had loved, in a room she had always wanted them to be in. He had not written this in any of the applications. It was not the kind of thing you wrote in an application. It was the kind of thing you carry in a folder, behind the paperwork, on a pad with a tally on it, until the right moment. By application 9, in January 2022, Francine had started to notice that Earl seemed to spend a disproportionate amount of time on the Family Feud website. She mentioned this to June. June said Earl had his reasons. Francine said, "Did the reasons involve applying again?" June said she couldn't say. Francine said she was going to take that as a yes. June said Francine should do what she felt was right. Francine decided the right thing was to bring it up with Earl directly, which she did at a Sunday dinner in February. And Earl had looked at her across the table and said he had submitted a few times, yes. And Francine had looked at him with the expression of a woman who has known someone for 63 years and said, "Earl Buford, how many times?" He said, 9. The table was quiet for a moment. Terrell said, "Dad." Earl said he had a system. Keisha looked at her husband. Terrell looked at his father. June looked at her sweet tea. After that Sunday dinner, the applications became a family project. Earl submitted the 10th in April 2022, with Terrell's help refining the digital submission format, and Francine's contribution of a new family photograph taken specifically for the purpose. Everyone in Sunday clothes, June in a different hat, the good one, Francine having announced that they were going to give these people something to look at. Keisha had written an additional paragraph for the submission that described the family with the precise and genuine warmth of a high school principal who knew exactly how to make a person feel seen on paper. They submitted the 11th application in September 2022. They received the call in November 2022. Terrell answered his phone on a Tuesday morning and then immediately called Earl, and Earl was at the grocery store in the cereal aisle when the call came in, and he stood in the cereal aisle for a moment after Terrell told him, with his hand flat against the shelf, just steadying himself. And then he called June, and June said, "Oh, Earl," and he said, "I know, Junie." and that was the whole conversation. He did not tell them about his mother until the night before the taping. They were in the hotel in Atlanta, the 5 of them in 2 adjoining rooms, the night of March 6, 2023. And Earl had knocked on the connecting door and asked everyone to come sit for a minute, because he had something to say before tomorrow. They had gathered, June beside him on the edge of the bed, Terrell and Keisha on the 2 chairs, Francine on the corner of the other bed with her reading glasses still on. And Earl had said he wanted to tell them why he had applied 11 times. He told them about Edna, about the Sunday visits and the tally, and the system they had for watching together. He told them she had always wanted to see this family on that stage, and that he had thought about that on a Sunday afternoon in March 2018, and that he had been thinking about it every time he submitted since. He told them about the folder. He told them about the tally pad. He did not cry. Earl Buford was 68 years old and had been a postal worker for 31 years and had learned that certain weights were carried without performance, because performing the weight was a way of putting it down, and he was not ready to put it down. But his hands, folded in his lap, were not entirely still. June took one of his hands. She did not say anything. Francine said, "Why didn't you tell us, Earl?" He said, "Because it was mine to carry until it wasn't." Francine looked at him for a long time. She said, "Mama would have had this whole thing won by now." Earl said, "She would have called every answer from the parking lot." And then they had all laughed. Really laughed, the kind that comes out of something else, out of missing someone and being together in the missing. And the night had held that laughter for a while before it settled. None of them slept much. The taping was on March 7, 2023. The Buford family, Earl had kept the name Buford for the team even though Terrell and Keisha had a different last name, because it was Edna's name, because it was the name the folder was built on, walked into that studio and played the finest game any of them had played in 11 applications worth of Sunday practice rounds. Francine was extraordinary. 26 years of watching checkout lines had given her a map of ordinary American thinking that was, on this day, essentially a cheat code. She answered 4 questions in the first 2 rounds without hesitation, each one landing in the top 3 answers on the board, the audience responding each time with the specific sound of recognition. "Yes, of course, that's exactly right." June was fast and certain and had the quality Earl had described in his second application, the ability to complete a thought at survey-level accuracy, which meant she was playing not just to what she knew, but to what 200 people would know, which is a different and more demanding skill. Terrell was the anchor, quiet, load-bearing, always there when the board needed him. Keisha read the room and read the questions and delivered the answer that nobody else had thought of twice in the 3rd round, both times for significant points. Earl played the way a man plays when he has been waiting 4 years and is not going to waste a single moment of it. He was at the board 6 times. He converted 5. They won the 1st round. They won the 2nd. They led going into the 4th, which was where the Morrison family, no, the Castillo family from El Paso, Texas, strong and fast and anchored by a grandmother named Rosa, who had a board instinct that matched Francine's in a way that made the 2 of them exchange a look of mutual professional respect at one point, began to close the gap. It was close. It was close the way things are close when both sides are genuinely good, and neither will give ground easily. The 4th round went to the Castillos by 7 points. The 5th round was decided by 1 answer, a single survey answer that the Castillo family's youngest member, a 20-year-old named Marco, pulled from somewhere that nobody else on either team had reached. It was the number 4 answer. It was worth 9 points. The Buford family lost the game by 9 points. They had come 11 applications, 4 years, 1 hotel night, and 1 conversation about a tally pad to lose by 9 points. The studio exhaled. Earl stood at the podium, and the board showed the final score, and he looked at it for a moment. Then he did the thing that nobody expected, the thing that would be watched 37 million times in the following week, and that no one who saw it could fully describe afterward, except to say that it was the most graceful thing they had ever seen a person do in the moment of losing something they had worked 4 years to reach. He smiled. Not the polite smile, not the brave smile, the real one, small, private, directed at the board, as if he and the board had an understanding, as if the board had told him something he already knew and he was acknowledging it. As if 9 points was a number, and what he had come for was something that didn't live in numbers. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey had been moving toward the Castillo family to acknowledge the win. He stopped. He turned back to Earl. He looked at that smile for a long moment. Then he walked back to Earl's podium and said, "Tell me what you're smiling at." Earl said, "My mother." The studio fell completely silent. Steve said, "Tell me." And Earl told him. All of it. The Sunday visits to Fordyce, the tally pad, the calling out of answers from her chair, the April morning in 2016 when she went, and he held her hand, and the pad was still by the telephone. The Sunday afternoon in 2018, when he sat at the kitchen table and thought about what she had always wanted for this family, and opened the laptop and started typing. The 11 applications, the folder, the photograph with June in the good hat, the hotel room the night before where he had finally said it out loud. He said all of it in the even, measured voice of a man who has been a postal worker for 31 years and knows that the most important deliveries are the ones you carry carefully all the way to the door. When he finished, the studio was so quiet that you could hear the ventilation system. A sound technician named Carl, 18 years on live television, said later that he had set down his headphones and pressed his palms flat on his board and stared at them for a moment because he needed something physical to hold on to. A woman in the 5th row of the audience had her hands pressed together in front of her face. Not applause, prayer. She was not the only one. Steve Harvey stood in front of Earl Buford and his jaw moved once. He turned away for a moment. Just a beat. One beat. The camera on his profile. And what was on his face was not something he was producing. It was something arriving. He pressed his fist against his mouth once. Then he turned back and looked at Earl and said 5 words, and his voice, which had hosted this show for 14 years and which had said almost every kind of thing a human voice can be asked to say, was not fully level. "Edna was here today." He said it like a fact. He said it like he had no doubt. The studio fell completely silent in the way that a room goes silent when something true has been said about someone who is not there, and who everyone, suddenly, wishes was. Francine put her hand over her face. Keisha turned into Terrell's shoulder. June made no sound and looked at no one and held Earl's arm with both hands. Earl looked at the ceiling for one moment. Then he looked at Steve. He nodded once, the way you nod when someone names the thing you have been carrying and you are too full to answer in words. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the audience and said, "This man applied to this show 11 times over 4 years, and he did it because his mother sat in a chair in Fordyce, Arkansas, and called out answers every weekday evening for 40 years. And she always wanted to see her family on this stage. And tonight, he brought her here. He carried her in a folder with her tally pad in it, and he drove to Atlanta, and he played this game as well as it can be played. And he lost by 9 points, and his first response was to smile at the board like he and the board had a private conversation. He paused. Because the 9 points was never the point. But Steve wasn't done. He walked to camera 1. He straightened his jacket. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. You have somebody, a parent, a grandparent, someone gone, who had a version of this. A dream they had for your family that they did not live to see happen. And you have been carrying it, maybe, in a folder. Maybe not literally, but somewhere. And tonight, I want to say to you, the carrying is the honoring. Every application Earl submitted was a Sunday visit he was still making. Every one of those 11 submissions was him sitting in that chair with her and calling out answers one more time. You cannot lose 4 years of that. There is no board that measures it. There is no score that touches it. It already happened. The studio fell completely silent for a very long time. A camera operator named Bev, 12 years on the show, had seen everything, was leaning against the wall behind her camera with her arms folded and her head bowed. She stayed that way until the floor director signaled the next segment. The Castillo family had been watching from their side of the stage. Rosa Castillo, the grandmother, had been still through all of it. When Steve finished speaking, she said, not into a microphone but clearly enough that the nearest camera caught it, "Somebody's mama is proud tonight." Her family did not cross the stage. They did not need to. The acknowledgement was complete, and Rosa knew it. But Steve wasn't done. He announced that the show was making a $25,000 contribution to Earl and June in Edna's name. The first time in the show's history that a contribution had been dedicated to a contestant's deceased parent on the air. He asked Earl what Edna would have said about the amount. Earl, who had been holding himself very carefully together for several minutes, looked at Steve with something loosening in his face and said, "She would have said, 'It's a start.'" Steve Harvey laughed. The full laugh, the one that takes over. And the studio came back to itself, warmth flooding back into a room that had been holding something enormous. And the laughter was the release. The episode aired on May 2nd, 2023. It became the highest-rated Family Feud episode of that season. 37 million views across platforms in the first 5 days, trending in 21 countries. A postal workers' union shared the clip with the note, "This is what 31 years of showing up looks like." An archival show about family legacy programs featured a 20-minute segment on Earl and Edna. A grief counselor in Little Rock, Arkansas, said in an interview that she had shown the clip to 3 separate clients in the same week, and that each time the client's response had been the same. They had cried and then said they needed to call someone. 3 months after the episode aired, Earl drove to Fordyce on a Sunday. He sat in his mother's house. Francine had kept it, was renting it to a young couple, but the couple was visiting family that weekend, and Francine had given Earl the key. He sat in Edna's chair, the one by the window where the light came in right, and he took the tally pad out of his jacket pocket, and he looked at the numbers. Her total. His total. The margin she had considered definitive. He took a pen from his pocket. He added one more mark to her side. He put the pad back in his pocket, sat in her chair for a while in the quiet afternoon light, and then drove home. A year after the episode, Earl and June established the Edna Buford Family Legacy Fund at their church, a small scholarship for graduating seniors from Pine Bluff, who were the first in their family to attend college. It was funded by the show's contribution and by the donations that had arrived in the weeks after the episode aired, which totaled $41,000 from strangers in 14 states. The first scholarship was awarded in June 2024. Earl presented it himself at the ceremony in his Sunday clothes. He said 4 sentences about Edna. He said, "She believed in showing up. She believed in keeping score. She believed that a family who played together was a family who stayed together. And she was right about all three. Today, Earl Buford is 70 years old. He still drinks sweet tea. He still reads everything 3 times. The manila folder is in the top drawer of his desk now, not hidden. Terrell framed a copy of the final confirmation email and hung it in the hallway of Earl and June's house, and Earl had looked at it when Terrell put it up and said that was too much, and June had said that was not too much at all, and that had been the end of that conversation. The tally pad is still in his jacket pocket. He takes it everywhere. Edna is still winning. He sees no reason to change that. Some things you carry for 4 years, and some things you carry forever. And the difference between them is only whether the carrying ever felt like a burden. For Earl Buford, it never did. It felt, every single Sunday, like a visit. If this story reached you today, subscribe and hit that bell right now. We find people like Earl every single week, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Share this with someone who is still carrying something for a person they've lost, and let them know the carrying counts. Drop a comment and tell us about the person you'd bring to that stage, if you could. We read every word, every time.